Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Inner Talks. Today, I have the honor of having a great investigator. His journey has been amazing. He has gone through a lot of paths from therapy, an author, a lot of research process as well. So, Israel, if you can give us an understanding of who is in front of me right now, I'm so honored, and thank you for accepting this invite.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Let me just say, first of all, that I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem, where I live. That
Wonderful.
I am married for 40 years and have 4 children and 4 grandchildren. I grew up in Baltimore and moved to Israel when I was 21 years old. Um, I think the biggest part of my story is how I have transformed over the years. I grew up in a religious Jewish family, Zionist family that saw Israel as very important for the Jewish people, and living in Israel is very important. Um, and I did come to Israel, and I had some very difficult years uh, of really not knowing who I was, experiencing periods of depression, experiencing periods of thinking that I'm amazing and wonderful. But then once again, going back into depression, ultimately, I became aware that I'm bipolar. That's something that comes down one of my family lines. And so that was a first transformation of consciousness, that, who I was. I wasn't either the person who was depressed or the person that was high. I was somebody um, different that I had to discover. Uh, in the course of discovering who I am, I studied family therapy and became a therapist and started working with people who had been abused sexually as children. And I hadn't learned anything about that in my training. And I just went along with my clients as best as I could to help them. And I discovered that several of them were people with what's now called dissociative identity disorder. Then it was multiple personality disorder. Um, and I had to really, in order to work well with them, I had to come to terms with I'm talking to one person and there are many of them. And it's so ingrained in us that the person opposite you is just one person, and you have to go through a real transition to be able to accept that there are these different personalities. Each one needs to be related to separately. So, and then that opened me to seeing all the abuse and the terrible, terrible things, that go on in the world, and what can I do with that? And then as I did that, I found myself with one of my clients who was telling me a story of horrific abuse, and I found myself dissociating. So I didn't know what it was at the time, but I like wasn't there. And that's I said, I can't be there. I can't really listen. I can't hear you, but I have to make the signs like help you think that I'm listening because you deserve to be listened to. But I wasn't there. I couldn't do it. And that actually opened up a period of recognizing that I had been sexually abused as a child. Um, and that was the reason that I was triggered. And that meant going back to my history, and who I was. Who am I? What
Yes.
my narrative about my life did not include any of those things, and yet those stories, not from my family but from the community, they were They were there inside me. And I went through many years of recovery, not finding therapists capable of helping me. Much of it I had to do on my own. That's the first little bit about my journey. I think the main theme is constantly discovering that things aren't what I thought. And in order to respond to them well, I need to stretch myself. I need to let go of things that were sort of obvious and discover other things that I could not have imagined before.
Absolutely. Israel, thank you for sharing that information and part of your journey. One of the things that I truly admire of you is that you didn't let trauma define you in any possible way. You actually used all of this information of your life to transform it and use it to your benefit. And I don't think a lot of people is able to do that. Like they might
Mm.
have a lot of triggers in their past, but they never first they don't do the work, the inner work. Second, there's not enough triggers in the outside for them to realize that they have or they are struggling with something. So from somebody that has struggled with something that it's so sensitive and unique, because I know that back in the time you might not have a lot of information of what is a
Mm.
bipolar disorder, how do I face depression, anxiety. How did you do that? How was that possible for you to transform all that and use it to your advantage to become a better individual?
Um, that's a good question. It's obviously very much a process, a lot of um, finding things that work. One thing that's different about me, which is related to what you said, for better or for worse, I didn't have shame about any of this. And I was open from a very early time. Um, and I was spent some years being a therapist and being part of a therapy and social worker community. And I was the first and for many years the only person with mental illness or survivor of sexual abuse who spoke openly about it, and used my story to promote social change. Um, the vast majority of therapists, there are many therapists who have all kinds of issues, but it's a taboo usually, uh, which is horrible, really. You think of how they're inculcating that shame if, in their clients. If that's how they feel about it themselves. It's something that you need to be ashamed of, and it's a private thing. I mean, I find that the diagnosis, both the bipolar diagnosis and the sexual abuse post trauma, as really keys to my recovery. After I had years searching where I didn't have answers, and to have an answer, oh, it's an illness. I can take medication. And it's not my fault, I'm not fucked up. It's not that there's something wrong with me as a human being. There's a thing here that I need to deal with, and there's a way to deal with it. Also with trauma, I mean, there was already literature that could guide me in what I could do for myself, and I learned a lot from my clients as well, and ways that I could help them, I could help myself as well. It's really dissociative identity disorder is an amazing coping mechanism. I mean, to recognize, also to recognize evil, that was a very big discovery that evil, to hear the stories of the kinds of things that are done to children deliberately and sadistically. It's not just, somebody, a parent losing it. It's that people have an agenda and they use one after another, and then so it recognize it's all part of. I guess one of the things that really drives me is trying to understand reality and understand the complexity uh, of reality, because I believe that the better I understand, the more I can do, whether for
Absolutely.
myself or also for other people, and also in the world. I mean,
Yes.
let me share with you something has become really fundamental for me. Uh, I was in a program, a master's degree program for family therapy, when I basically discovered my diagnosis in the diagnostic manual. I saw those symptoms, that was me, of bipolar disorder. And I went through the first year, 2 years of coming to terms with bipolar disorder. And I was lucky to be in a program where they encouraged us to write a thesis that is self-reflective, is important for our growth. And I wrote, so I decided to look at my relationship with my wife from the perspective of what happens in a couple before the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, when the couple, when both members of the couple are dealing with the phenomena of bipolar disorder, and it's terrible for both the person with it and for the partner. And I came upon the writings of a very famous social scientist called Kurt Lewin. And he wrote about field theory and social space. And he wrote about the life space, and that how the life space of an individual changes over time. You know, it's very, very small as a baby or as a young child. Your interactions, your world is very small. And as you grow, uh, it expands tremendously. And as you become an elderly, it shrinks again. Began to look at bipolar disorder from the perspective of space. And I saw that everybody talks about bi- depression and mania as low and high, right? I mean, that's a metaphor. When you get depressed, so you talk about yourself as being down, as being low. You're manic, so you're high. It's an up and down, right? And using Lewin's terms, I started looking at it as the the mania is a filling up. You know, sometimes people have an experience of filling up
Yes.
and expanding, like we feel expansive. It's definitely it's the life space expands, expands to the extent that we feel like at one in the universe, and we have access to all kinds of insights and spiritual things, and we're really out there, right?
Yes.
Uh, at the same time, in depression, we empty out, and it's so disturbing that we focus in on ourselves and on that void. It's very painful, and our life space contracts, and we stop interacting with people outside. And the more we focus on ourselves, the smaller our space gets. And I can say from the perspective of somebody who was seriously suicidal a number of times, that it's like the experience is that there's no space in the world for you. It's like you're closed out of reality. And so the thought of sort of slipping out and moving to the other side is a very natural thought and feeling. You know, let's look at the spouse at what happens. What happens to a spouse when one of the partners is depressed? The spouse feels sucked in, right? They need to overextend themselves into the space of their partner to try to pull them out. And it doesn't work. It never works. And the spouse becomes um, exhausted and frustrated and they lose their own sense of self. Um, Now, bipolar disorder, it's interesting because it's a movement. It's a contraction and expansion and a contraction and expansion. So at some point, the person with bipolar illness disorder comes out of the depression and begins in time, in a matter of weeks or months, begins to feel really good about himself. And, I felt like, okay, now I'm past it. I made the most out of my depression. I learned what I needed to learn, and now look, I'm feeling much better. Now I'm able to do so many things, and I was able to help other people, and I've able to face death because I had faced death. I mean, all of these things that are very expansive. Now, the spouse doesn't forget the depression. All that time, she was extending herself and being rejected when she extended herself. And now, when the partner is getting hypomanic, I never actually got manic. I didn't get psychotic, but I got called hypomanic. But she found it very invasive. All of a sudden, was invading her space. I wasn't seeing her. Didn't leave room for her. I was sure that I was right about everything. What was wrong with her that she couldn't understand, that she couldn't see it, right? So what I took from all of this is that this space thing, it's more than a metaphor. Give me space, or I feel like you're invading my space or all that. We use it as a metaphor, but it's a reality. It's an invisible aspect of reality that is affecting us. It affects our experience very deeply, and to the extent that we don't see it, um, then uh, then we can't do anything about it. I mean, I found, for instance, over time, after I had after I had this model, and after I was settled with the medication, I still would be terrified when I would feel that maybe I'd be going into depression. I think there's the trauma of depression, um, because before we know how to deal with it, we're helpless against those feelings. You have those feelings, and then it just pulls you down. So even if I was okay with the medication, I still needed to do the work to be able to say to myself, you know, I'm I'm contracting, and it's okay. Like life is like that. You have the expansion and you have the contraction. It's not something you need to get worked up about. But you need to recognize that when you're contracting, don't try to push yourself out into the world and get everything done. And don't get down on yourself that you can't do that. You stay at home, do the laundry, do the dishes, take care of the things close to home. And within a day or two, it just lifts.
Oh, Israel,
So,
I'm impressed by how how much acknowledgement you have over all these like topics. Of course, you're an expert on it, but I have so many questions, and I'm very intrigued. But I'm gonna choose one in particular. You mentioned how the process between you and your wife was, and how this expansion and contraction of the space was a challenge for you guys to overcome. And I'm pretty sure this happens in every single relationship or interaction when one of the partners is like, as you said, right, I need space because one of them is, I don't know, getting into different feelings or situations. Are those healthy? Are those like, how do you I think what I'm trying to say is like, how do you go through that motion? How do you go through that challenge with not not ending in completely exhaustion, because one of the partners might feel like, what is all of this? I don't understand. And let's say the other partner doesn't even know how to articulate what it needs. Because it sounds to me that you have done a lot of inner work. So you knew exactly, maybe not at the beginning, but you knew how to pull yourself out. But what happens when you don't have that, like people do not have that sense of acknowledgement of their own inner and outer field?
It's very hard.
Yes.
It's very hard, and there's a lot of suffering.
Mm.
There's a lot of suffering that's based on not understanding. I mean, you have many good people who want what's best for themselves and for their partner, but they're like victimized by these processes. And then a lot of times they also go to therapy and they spend a lot of time and money and invest a lot of hope. I mean, I can speak personally from that. And they don't, this is, therapy is not going to give them a lot of insights that they need. Um, that I very much believe in the importance of good diagnosis. Like until before I knew that I was sexually abused as a child, and I knew it because it came up from me, inside me, then all the therapy wasn't going to even begin to work on my unconscious. It was all a waste of time.
True.
But if you know, that's why if you can understand it, if you can see these dynamics, um, that's that was what underlaid what you have some experience with now from what I do of self and field, of trying to give created a model of action research. That the whole purpose of it is to help people to gain insight into how these field dynamics, both within themselves and in their interactions with others, are dictating so much of their experience, and they're feeling helpless in so many situations. They're responding, and they can't respond in any other way, even if they're told you should do this, you should do that, but they don't have the key to um, their own freedom within interactions in the fields that they live in.
Yes. And let's talk a little more about that, Israel. So currently you are developing research within self in field. Can you explain us a little bit more of what does this consist of? How is it? Just to get a better understanding of the concept.
Yeah, I will. But before I do that, I want to say how delighted I am. Here I am in Jerusalem, and I have a wonderful partnership at UIW in San Antonio, which has enabled us to develop tremendously our work. Uh, Dr. Alfredo Ortiz is a collaborator. For 3 years, we've been uh, doing a course together. First, I I did it together with my partner here, Victor Friedman, by Zoom, like we're doing now. But for 2 years, I've come and actually spent intensive weekends with the students, and also been in touch with them during the semester. And amazing things are really happening. We just had during my last visit, I asked to meet with past students, and it's just a semester course, and we had a group of 11 former students, and every single one of them talked about how their lives had been transformed by this course. It's really quite amazing. The basis of self and field is, first of all, recognizing that each of us lives in a variety of fields that influence us, that impact upon us. I mean, we have, let's say, if we're in a couple, that's a field. If we're in our family of origin, that's a field. If we're in an organization, or in our a community at home. Each one of these fields has an ongoing existence, and we are a part of it. And the field is characterized by ongoing interaction patterns. And we experience ourselves differently in different fields. When we're home with our parents, in that home, or with a group of friends, we feel differently about ourselves, and we can bring different parts of ourselves. Uh, but we never recognize this. All of the therapy and self-help and social sciences, the whole concept of fields and us being a part of the fields, and not only that we're a part, but that we actually are constantly reenacting that field. And many times we have interactions, let's say in a family with your sister or with your parent, and it feels like we're just reacting to a reality. And it makes they do what they do, and we react that way, and we don't. It's not our fault. It's not our responsibility. They did that. But if you look at it in terms of fields, you see how we are constantly recreating by what we do. We're recreating the field as it is. And we're acting that way because we're thinking and feeling in a certain way. The action is a product of our thinking and feeling. But if we could look more closely at one of these interactions where those patterns are reenacted, and if we look at what we're thinking and what we're feeling, and then we look at how the field is impacting upon us, and we ask us the question, is that how I want to think? Is that how I want to feel? And then we have what's called an inquiry process, a self-and-field inquiry process, where we help people look at that reality and come to a different understanding of that reality that enables them to think and feel differently, and then they can act differently. And then the other person, not always, but often the other person will then respond differently. And the field, which seemed to be really stuck, is all of a sudden much more dynamic, and it's much more open to change. That means that each individual in their relationships and their interactions has a tremendous amount of potential for bringing about change in the world. Uh,
I love the concept of actions towards the fields that we are part of. And I wanna add to what Israel just mentioned, that I am blessed of being part of this process that they are doing. And as somebody that went through the process of uh, reflecting of an inner field, how my interactions are affecting me and how I think and how I interact towards those. I have a question for you. Like, let's say I already identify myself as part of a field, right? Like I'm part of a field.
mm,
This is how I think. These are my behaviors. Now I have developed certain actions of like, how do I want to transform my interaction towards the field? What would be your suggestion in like, okay, we already identify a problem, we see it there. Now, how can I transform that? Like, if I still want to be part of that field, whatever it is, it can be school, as you said, it can also be a partnership, um, friendship. If the other person is not fully responding, as you said, because it's my interaction towards the field.
interacting with a certain person, with a specific person, and that person is interacting with you on the basis of the old patterns. Now that other person is going to be surprised. Wait a minute, what's going on here? This isn't what I've come to expect.
Yes.
So they may be somewhat doubtful, or they may say, I heard one of the students that their partner says, no, the sister said, you gone to therapy, huh?
Yes.
You're not getting sucked in. You're not fighting back. You must have gone to therapy. But that's exactly the sign of that you're breaking the pattern. You're no longer
Mm.
playing the part of that pattern. But what I want to add is that it's a process of experimentation. There's the action research cycle is that you do this work, you identify the specific context, the specific interaction that you want to change. You you plan a specific action that you're going to do in that, and then you do it, and you see what happens, and then you learn from what happens. It may take you to a different place. It may not. But either way, you're going to look at what happens, and you're going to go back to how you're feeling about it and how it's, what it means, what you've learned about reality from that interaction. You had before, you had a lot of assumptions, and now, especially if the person responded differently, so then your assumptions are being undermined. You thought it was impossible. No, that guy would never. There's nothing you can do with him. But now you say, oh, wait a minute, if I'm acting a little bit differently, then actually he also responds differently. So that means that the things that I had thought about him were not necessarily valid. And if
Right.
now I can see him a different way, so it may open me to thinking of doing, the next action.
Things differently.
You're in a different place.
So you will say, Israel, that the goal of all of these action research process that you guys are developing is to help people understand that process within themselves, or what is the ending goal of this action research process that you are part of right now?
My end goal is to make a better world. And a lot of people do a lot of things. You go to protests. I go to a lot of protests in Israel. You 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 vote. You become engaged in projects. All of those things. And unfortunately, they have not enough leverage. You know, there's a lot that's very depressing about the world right now. In Israel as well as in the United States, and people who care about um, a world in which people can flourish and grow. I think it's an amazing revelation that the place where this can happen is everywhere, every individual in their own interactions. But it's not just one person's therapy, because we all have different worlds that we're involved in. I through that course, the 10 students in that course, and each one of those people in their lives are transforming their relationships, and they're learning a way of relating that they'll be able to take into other fields and relationships. So it's really something that gives me hope, which is why it's so important to me to try and get it out. I mean, as of now, very, very few people know about this. We worked on developing it for over 20 years, and we've written certain articles, but the San Antonio partnership has given us a real opportunity and breakthrough to try and move it beyond us.
That's absolutely amazing, and I look forward to see like the results of it, because I'm living it myself, and it's been a complete different approach on how to see a problem and really get in depth into the problem, not even by finding results, immediate results, but by asking the right questions. Correct? It's a very, this is what was super intriguing for me, is like you have a situation, and then just by asking the right questions, you get to see and perceive a complete different reality that you were seeing at first. And that for me was very unique. We typically jump into assumptions, right? This is like this, it's
Mhm.
because this is what's happening, and this is my issue. And then you end up finding that it has nothing to do with it because it's a complete different route. So, Israel, let me share a little more as well, that I would love to for you to tell us this part of the therapies that you have applied throughout your journey, because even this action research process is also a type of therapy. All of these processes, what's been your favorite, and what would you say, I think this is my thing? Like, maybe I know you also do singing, you also do a lot of metaphors. There's a lot that I know we I would love to share it all, but I will,
Mm.
like, what would be the most important one for you that you will say, I have seen a lot of transformations when I use this approach with people?
The self and field is my favorite. It's something that that I have developed. It's really my life's work. Um, and as I talked about here, it reflects my life story about the transformation of consciousness, of recognizing that reality is more complex. It's like what you said. People you come in with a story about how their reality is, and we sort of undermine it, and in challenging them, sort of a basic assumption is that, oh no, there's a lot more that you can look at like that, but you could also look at it like that. Um, and it's also related to everything that I've done has to do with trying to figure out how to be effective in the world. Um, I mean, I haven't been very effective in the world in terms of in ordinary terms of, job and money and those kinds of things. I haven't been very successful, but in terms of impact, I've been quite successful, and I'm hoping that that impact with all this will also expand.
And
And
I
that's
think
because the world is not built for these things. I mean, this is very much counter cultural. There's no place where nobody's looking for this, right?
I know.
Nobody's even thinking that it could be possible.
And that's exactly one of the main reasons I developed this podcast, because I wanted to have these profound conversations of things that for me matter, which is like, how are we thinking, how are we understanding reality, how we feel. Because you're right, I think we are nowadays, we're in an instant type of um, reality all the time. Like, we want things, immediate pleasure, immediate, how do we perceive success? And I think success means so many different ways for everybody. Like, if, like, I don't know how in your country it is measured, right? What do people value more, like money, uh, inner spirituality? Like, I think it depends on everybody, and you are so right. Like, maybe cultural, if we talk about culture, there's also so many differences. I have found a lot of those with my Mexican background. When I first came to the US, complete different reality, how to develop friendships, starting with that. I remember when I first came into a classroom, and I will talk to somebody, talk for 5-10 minutes, and then I will think that that person next day will say hi and be my
Mm.
friend, but then that's not how it goes, right? It was very much coldness. And adapting to those interactions and realities, how has that been for you? Like, have you seen a lot of cultural shock on your end when it comes to these type of scenarios in which you try to maybe come and share all this inner knowledge, and you find that block of cultures? Has that been a challenge for you?
I don't think that that's the issue. But I did want, as you were talking, I remembered something that the past students said that was that was really, really important that I want to share. A lot of them said that what they realized about themselves before the course was how much they needed to be in control. They needed to know what the course was going to be, what the requirements were going to be, exactly what they needed to do, and when, and they, they need to do just what they needed to do in order to satisfy the
Mhm.
professor so that they can get a good grade. And you have a whole system that's built on that. I mean, that's the entire mindset. And in that mindset, there's very little exploration of self, of who I am and what do I want. And I think that more than anything, this process has been getting people in touch with a much deeper place because we're asking people, what is it in your life that you want to change? What interaction specifically? And so we're really challenging people to look at what is meaningful and significant to them, and that hasn't ever happened to them in their education.
Yes.
It's funny, but it's tragic. It's a reflection of what education is and what it's become, and it's not easy to get off a course like this in a university. It's not easy in the administration, and it's not easy with the students. There's a lot of resistance to it because people want the status quo. They want to know what they need to do to get by. They don't want to be challenged to bring themselves into an academic process. Um, but all of these people that said how hard that was for them have felt that it's been a wonderful opportunity and that it enabled them to grow in ways that were inconceivable before.
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly the, the enriching experience of being part of a process that it's so unique. And at the end, the goal is not getting a grade. I mean, it's part of the process of being in a course. But at the end of the day, is how you relate, how you um, question yourself different. And for those who are listening right now, Israel, how what would be your advice on getting in this process of self-infield? Like, what would be those like little tips that we can give of like, hey, be more aware, because you are right, we are at a point of our lives in which we just do things to put in an agenda or check, I finished my day. How do we really get into that process of connection, self-infield, transformation, true transformation? Is there any advice that you can give from your expertise of doing this for so long?
I don't know. It's a process that people would have to go through. And unfortunately, we don't yet have the materials, the books out, but we will in time. But I would encourage people to begin to look. One of our exercises asks people to look at situations in which there is a uh, conflict between self and a field that they're in. Right? So many times we find ourselves in a job or in a relationship, and we realize that it is um, it's oppressive. It's difficult to stay in that field. And we have a model that we developed. We recognized a number of different ways that people deal with that situation. For instance, uh, one way is to what we call it knowing your place. Like if you're in a job and they want you to do things that you have to do and you don't feel like doing it, but you need the money, so you adapt yourself to um, doing what that field is requiring of you for your survival. Sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can't. So you can't. I was never good at that. That was not something that I was good at. One of the other patterns, this is something that I often did, is to try to change the field from within. Right? I'm in an organization. I think things should be done differently. I'm not really at a high level, but I have a certain amount of influence, and so I try as best as I can to change that field. My pattern in life has been to go through trying to change the field and then leaving. Another option is we call migration. Uh, Migration it can be from an organization, it can be people who left their religion or their church, left their culture and moved to another culture. You move from Mexico to America, you change fields.
Yes.
And that requires, as you talked about, all kinds of adaptation. So think that's one of the first one. Just another way of dealing with it uh, is trying to play by the rules and get to a higher level status and power, right? So instead of people telling you what you need to do, you get to a level where you have more autonomy and you can tell other people what to do. That's more of a political strategy. But I think a first thing for people to do is to begin to recognize the existence of fields, and that situation of conflict is a way to begin to see how a field is impacting us and how I have implicitly, we never actually, I mean, these are often very important life situations, and we all have stories about it, but we never consciously choose. We're usually pretty reactive in them. So to begin to see how that's working, and that's a good first step.
Thank you. I I think after this conversation, I see the self-in field completely different and
Mm.
more of kind of a different perspective to think about it. Um, so thank you for that. Israel, I would love to add to this conversation and maybe close with this part of life that I find very interesting, and at the same time, it can help an individual grow, which is the relationship aspect and the family aspect. Throughout this conversation, you have mentioned the role that your wife has had, your spouse. So, at this point of your life, how do you perceive all this interaction with her, with your sons, your family in general? Will you say that this field of yours has transformed you, of course, but how has that balance been for you, like of being a researcher and traveling and being part of these world changes, and at the same time preserving this field of yours as healthy as possible?
First of all, let me say it's a work in progress. Uh, there's still things that we haven't broken through from those earlier years, and it's not simple. What I can definitely say is that my wife and my family have provided me with a ground, a stability. We have a nice home. We have the family, the kids over for Shabbat meals. We go to them. We have grandchildren. We take care of them. I mean, my life. All that other stuff has sort of been um, I don't know, up in the air. It's not grounded. Much of what I did has not been grounded in the family and the relationships of the family, and working on those relationships. One of the things that is most meaningful to me is that I broke the chain of abuse. So often people who were abused then become abusers. And my children grew up with good parenting. much of which I learned much of my parenting from my wife. Um, but I also had my own, my own style. But I did not pass that down, and they're all, thank God, doing well. So that gives me a peace of mind, I think.
I think that's very brave of you because there's a lot of situations in families in which they never get in depth of what was the problem, and then those cycles keep repeating and repeating. So
Mm,
I do believe that when there's a stop and we really get in depth, we change the life of our future generations.
absolutely.
um, so Israel, thank you so much for sharing all of this. I would love to continue conversations with you about how this process of self-infield continues and the research aspect of it.
Hmm.
As of now, I would love just to close with maybe you sharing, if it's not through here, if you can share with us in a little piece of like an email or writing it, a little bit of your poem of who is Israel, because I find that very inspiring. I heard it in another podcast that you gave, and I would very much appreciate if we can
You
share it
didn't
with our
warn me to
listeners.
have it. I'm not sure that I can.
Yeah, if you don't have it in hand right now, I will share
No.
it like with our
Okay.
audience at a different time. But again, thank you for all of your insights, and let's continue these conversations in the future. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
It's been lovely talking to you. I appreciate it, and I'll be very happy to continue.
Thank you, Israel.